Okay, chapter 33 is about conditional statements. These are if-then type statements. There's other ways to construct them, but they are statements where the main clause, what's called the apodosis, the main clause, is conditioned upon something expressed in a subordinate clause called the protasis. So for the purposes of a conditional, we refer to the relevant subordinate clause, the one that is conditioning the main clause, as a protasis, and the main clause as an apodosis. Now, apodosis and protasis can come in either order. You can say, I'm going to the store if you give money, or if you give me money, I'm going to the store. Same as English, you can put them in either order, though we call them if-then clauses. It's probably a slightly more conventional to put the protasis first. There are 6 kinds of these, as this textbook lays it out. There are the indicative conditions and the subjunctive conditions. The indicative ones are pretty straightforward. The changes between the different kinds of indicative are simply changes in time. The simple fact future and the simple fact present are almost translated the same way in English. There is something else going on there in Latin. There's a sort of futurity to it, I suppose. If he is doing this, he is wise, as opposed to if he is doing this, he will be wise. You could translate this straight, right? You could just say, for the simple fact future, if he will do this, he will be wise. They say that's not good English in the textbook. I think you and I decide what's good English. But, so these are more or less straightforward. You can pretty much just translate, with maybe that one exception, pretty much just translate these as the temporal element would suggest you should. Notice that the perfect here in the simple fact past is being used as a past tense verb. That's a little complicated. We've talked about this, and there's different ways to sort of talk about what's going on with the perfect tense verb. But note here, it's functioning for the purposes of a conditional sentence as a past tense. And I think that makes good sense. If he did this, si id fecit, if he did this, he was wise. The subjunctive ones are a little more complicated. The first two, the contrary to fact ones, are counterfactuals. They're presenting a conditional that is not satisfied, right? Something that is not the case. So if he were doing this, he would be wise, implies that he is not, in fact, doing this. For the contrary to fact present, you are going to use in the protasis the imperfect subjunctive. In fact, you're going to use the textbook example has you using imperfect subjunctives for both the protasis and the apodosis. Not always the case, as noted at the bottom of this page, but so for something that is not the case, you are using the imperfect subjunctive. That's not obvious, right? It's not obvious that you would use a past tense incomplete subjunctive to express something that is currently not the case. You kind of just have to memorize it. Contrary to fact in the past makes better sense, especially if you memorize that first one. Then you can say, okay, I want to shift back from the subjunctive imperfect into something less real, into something equally as unreal, but further into the past. Pluperfect subjunctive makes sense what you'd use. Si id fecicit. So you have the infinitive, perfect infinitive, plus the ending there, fecicit, giving you a contrary to fact in the past, something that was not the case, and what would have resulted if the case had been different. Lastly, so those are the two contrary to fact ones, the imperfect and the pluperfect subjunctive. You can remember, easy to remember that, is that a past tense subjunctive is used for counterfactuals. The future less vivid, which is sort of a funny way of describing this. So this is sort of what they're calling simple facts are sometimes called future or present, past, and future more vivid. So this is a correlate to that other way of describing things that is not used in this very textbook. It's kind of strange. But a future less vivid is more or less the same thing as the future simple fact, but slightly less vivid, slightly less real, more uncertainty. More uncertainty. I think that's what I would say. He should be wise, or if he should do this, would that, if he would do this thing, is I think how we would say this in English, he would be wise. And that adding would, as opposed to saying if he did this, if he would do this, is adding a sort of level of uncertainty, maybe expressing a little bit of doubt. I encourage you to go through these 11 exercises and identify them, and notice that this is a nice way of categorizing conditionals. In reality, they mix and match. These are less consistent than a textbook would have you believe.